US President Donald Trump has embarked on what one would call a tariff tantrum. First, he imposed 26% tariffs on Indian goods back in April. That was shortly put on hold. What followed were negotiations on a trade deal. Those negotiations are still on. But despite that, Donald Trump last week announced 25% tariff on India. And yesterday, he doubled down. He raised it up to 50% with a caveat that there are 21 days before it comes into effect. He's even threatened to raise it further. Now, while India is in no mood to buckle down or to bow down to this pressure tactic that's coming to the fore from the United States, New Delhi has made it clear that there is a level of national interest that needs to be looked at, and that is exactly what we are going to do, that we're not going to cow down to anybody's pressure. But there is some amount of uncertainty that is being seen by certain sectors that could feel the heat, that are bracing for impact if those negotiations on a trade deal do not take place in the next 20 days and these 50% tariffs do come into effect. Could that be a setback to some of these sectors? Well, they're definitely bracing for it. But as far as India is concerned and its stance is concerned, not only are we continuing with these negotiations with the United States, but India is also engaging with both adversaries and allies. From Moscow to Beijing, New Delhi has signaled that we won't be boxed in by what Donald Trump is trying to do, that there is a pressure play that we are seeing from Washington, but that's not something that is going to push us down to toe the line that the US president wants us to. Now, as far as these tariffs are concerned, semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are currently exempt. But who knows with Donald Trump what's coming next?
Indian officials have said that there are other countries that are buying Russian oil.
It's okay.
Like China, for instance,
It's
buys
okay.
more.
Yeah.
Why are you singling India out for these additional sanctions?
It's only been 8 hours, so let's see what happens over the next.
Sanctions.
You're going to see a lot more.
So this is a taste of
You're going to see a lot more. You're going to see so much secondary sanctions. In other words, we'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building.
And from August 27, this 50% tariff would come into effect unless India and the United States crack a deal or if Trump decides to double down further. But the 50% is not the total tariff for India. There are certain sectors that would be paying more. For example, let's just take apparel, and there are two parts to it, knitted and woven. As far as knitted apparel is concerned, it already faces 13.9% as the most favored nation tariff. Add the 50% that was announced yesterday, and that takes it up to 63.9%. US's share in India's exports in that particular region, in that particular sector, is about 34%. Now, as far as woven apparel is concerned, it would face a total tariff of about 60%. The 50 that we had yesterday and the existing 10.3 MFN tariff. But India is not ready to make concessions, at least as far as some sectors are concerned. Dairy, agriculture, those are sensitive both economically and politically for New Delhi, which is why those leeways that the United States wants us to make, those have not been made just yet. And that was reiterated by none other than the Prime Minister of the country, Narendra Modi, today.
भारत अपने किसानों के, पशुपालकों के और मछुआरे भाई बहनों के हितों के साथ कभी भी समझौता नहीं करेगा। और मैं जानता हूं व्यक्तिगत रूप से मुझे बहुत बड़ी कीमत चुकानी पड़ेगी, लेकिन मैं इसके लिए तैयार हूं। मेरे देश के किसानों के लिए, मेरे देश के मछुआरों के लिए, मेरे देश के पशुपालकों के लिए आज भारत तैयार है।
Now, India has 20 days to avoid those 50% tariffs. So here's what India could do to mitigate the consequences. The negotiations that are currently underway, India remains committed to resolving this trade dispute through dialogue. We are going to be seeing the United States' negotiating team in India in not too far from today, perhaps about 2 weeks from now. So mutually beneficial trade agreement with the United States is one option that we're exploring. India, meanwhile, is also actively looking at strengthening trade relationships with other countries and regions, including the Middle East, including the European Union, Latin America and Africa as well. Just recently, we signed an FTA with the United Kingdom as well. This is to ensure that we reduce our reliance on the US market, and it's also a signaling that India is not only dependent on the United States. The Indian government is planning a substantial export promotion mission to support exporters that would be affected by these uncertainties and by these tariffs. India is also re-evaluating potential concessions in the farm and dairy sector while these talks go on. Now, India has reiterated its stance on prioritizing energy security and market-based decisions for oil imports from Russia. But officials are also suggesting that there could be a potential shift towards US oil supplies if the price was competitive, because the only issue seems to be price. But is that the only issue for Donald Trump? Is Russian oil and India's continued import of that is the only issue that Donald Trump has? Many would suggest it's not. And lastly, India can consider reciprocal tariffs on the United States in response, much like what China did, which is why we did see a 90-day pause that came into effect from the United States as they continued their negotiations with China. But listen in to how the United States and the Trump administration has been responding when they've been cornered on the hypocrisy that India has been highlighting about importing from Russia.
China buys more Russian oil than India does, and they have not been targeted for that. So why is India having its tariffs doubled?
As the boss says, let's see what happens. Keep in mind that we have over 50% tariffs on China already.
Right, but you could go higher. But they haven't been punished for buying Russian oil, and India is being punished.
We have over 50% tariffs,
but not because
China,
of
so we don't
buying
want to get to
Russian
a
oil.
point where we actually hurt ourselves. Okay?
But
So
do you see why people would
that
be
question-
confused by that?
And I think I've given a really good answer to that. You got tariffs of 50%. We already have high tariffs on China. So I take your point. The president certainly will be working with China on that issue.
Do you agree with him that that was a really good answer?
That shows exactly what I think could be the worst outcome for the United States, that India has reacted very negatively, as you might expect, to these tariffs related to Russian oil purchases, in part because they see that China has not been tariffed. And Trump seems to be, in the minds of many China experts, setting up to treat China more leniently than he's treated India.